Hello, welcome to another online lesson of this Germany course in the GCSE. Today we're going to be looking at how Hitler goes from being Chancellor to becoming the Fuhrer or the Dictator. And it's a really fascinating story, really interesting, and in again two sort of ways of looking at this: ultimate opportunist or brilliant politician to create the situations needed for him to do this. Also thinking about this topic again as if it's a section B, where one interpretation might be an example. There are four main steps, maybe five, depending on how you break it down, into going from Chancellor to Fuhrer. Section B could be two interpretations focusing on just two of them, and you have to agree which one you think was most important in leading to him being Fuhrer. So overall, really good topic, really interesting story, and also really good for our exam if we think about it in the context of Section B. All right, so the question is, how does he secure control? We're going to try and get to an understanding of the steps that happened from 1933, January 30th, when he becomes Chancellor, to 1934, him being a Fuhrer, complete control at the end of any challenges, the dictatorship, if you like. All right, so that's the journey. Keeping in mind, he's now Chancellor, that's one thing, but we've seen in the last topic that we had 4 or 5 chancellors within a very short period of time. So just because you're chancellor doesn't make you automatically successful or long term. We know the president can remove the chancellor at any point in the Weimar Constitution. So this is going to be really interesting, and open your mind a little bit to how this happens. Be a bit cynical as well, but also consider the circumstances that happen over the next year or so. Okay, so let's get started. The steps to power are essentially, as you can see on the screen now. Hitler becomes Chancellor. There's a fire in which he blames the communist and therefore passes an emergency powers. That's what this lesson will focus on. Then there's going to be an election very close to the fire, but the communists are not allowed to vote in it. Again, bring a healthy dose of cynicism to this, and we'll talk more about that when we get onto it. But perhaps there's an idea there that this was a plan. But we'll talk about that as we go through this lesson. And then the last part of this lesson that we'll talk about is an enabling act, which essentially is exactly what it says. It enables Hitler to do whatever he wants under the guise of Germany's under attack. So someone has to take control. One strong leader, because democracy isn't working. They're the kind of things that he's going to say in the parliament. We'll also maybe touch on a little bit about what's happening around the world today as you're watching this, to see some similarities perhaps in how politicians sometimes get their way. All right. In the next lesson after this, we'll look at how Hitler then went on to kill any of his leaders or opposition within the Nazi party and without. So other important politicians who could perhaps stop him. This is called the Night of the Long Knives. So after that, all of his enemies are gone. Within his own party as well is important. So we can see here the steps to this. Before we start into this topic, though, just look at what's on the screen there and briefly, without really too much knowledge of the thing, just write these in an order of you think, based on what I've said really briefly, might be the most important way of getting Hitler to the Fuhrer. And after we finish the topic, we can come back to this, see if we can change your mind, see if you can add some explanation to why you chose those things. But really, just really quickly, just think about which of these things do you think are super important. Maybe without that, the next one wouldn't have happened, something like that. Okay, so that's the gist of what's coming. So let's get started into today's lesson. Hindenburg and von Papen have created this deal, remember. They put Hitler in power. Hitler is going to be Chancellor, von Papen is going to be Vice-Chancellor, and they believe that they can control Hitler. They've given him just a few Nazis within the cabinet. It all seems like a lovely plan to keep Hitler controlled, to give him power, to give him what he wanted all along, Chancellor. So Hindenburg is saying very clearly that he still hates Hitler, but von Papen was probably right. He's got the most votes in the election. So just due to the sheer fact of the Weimar Constitution and democracy, the president really does have to make him Chancellor. And that's what we saw happen on the 30th of January, 1933. He's only got a few ministers, remember, which again means they should be able to control him. And Hindenburg says it's going to take some crazy chain of events for Hitler to do anything really dangerous. Now, this is the first bit where we'll think about some cynicism here. It's going to take some crazy event or chain of events to give Hitler the power, because they are controlling him right now, aren't they? Now, you can go down the route here of thinking it was all just circumstance that Hitler took advantage of, or you can go down the route of saying that Hitler created all of the events we're going to talk about now, made sure they would happen, and was ready to react to them, or maybe a little bit of both. Okay, so that's where we are. This is very real life. This is how politics works. This is how sometimes we end up in situations where we have people in power who you wouldn't think normally would ever get into power through democracy. And remember, at the start of all of this, Hitler realized in 1923, didn't he, after the Munich Putsch, that he would have to be elected to do this properly. All right, ballot, not bullet. Okay, so what's the main reason, before we move on, that Hindenburg is confident Hitler is just in power by body? He can't do anything. What do you think? Summarising what he's just said in his little speech bubble there. When you're ready, unpause the video and we'll move on. Okay, so the newly appointed Chancellor Adolf Hitler, he's there 30th of January 1933. He calls an election for March, literally 1 month near enough into power, 5 or 6 weeks after being in power. So he obviously knows he's not got a majority with the seats that he got in the election. So he's Chancellor because he's the majority party, the party with the most votes, but he hasn't got a majority, so more than 50% of the whole Reichstag. So he hopes within a few short weeks of being in power, he calls another election. That's another election, and he's going to get a majority this time. Now, I don't know why he thinks that, to be honest, because he's taken advantage of the Depression. The 6 million people who voted for him who were unemployed, all of those things. The propaganda worked really well. And he still only got the seats that he got. Granted, enough to be Chancellor. But what do you think could possibly happen in the next few weeks that might just affect the election results of March? All right, Hindenburg agrees because he's the Chancellor. But then they have this little agreement, this little deal, sorry, or not a deal, that's the wrong word. Hitler does this, decrees this, he's the Chancellor, okay? That the police are allowed to stop election meetings where there is a, quote, danger to public security. Now, again, with a healthy dose of cynicism, if the police are allowed to do that, where do you think the police might go and stop political meetings in the run-up to an election? Do you think they're going to stop Nazi party meetings? Okay, do you think they're going to stop Communist Party meetings or those moderate middle parties? So this, again, cynically, might be a ploy, a plan to somehow disrupt the general election for all of the other parties. Now, that's being cynical. The police must be allowed into all political meetings, very similarly, as we've just said. I'm not sure that they're going to be rocking up to the Nazi Party meetings, but that is a decree from the Chancellor. All right. And then the new Minister for the Interior, so like in our country, the Home Secretary, I guess, the guy who's in charge of the police is a Nazi. So keeping in mind what we've just said, and now you've got Hermann Goering, who is in charge of the police and the Interior. Who do you think Goering is going to be directing his new Interior, his police force to? So Goering insists the police would show no mercy to those who are hostile to the state. Now, all of this so far, quote, danger to public security, quote, show no mercy to those who are hostile to the state, that is somebody's interpretation of a danger. Anybody could say that that is they're dangerous or this is a dangerous person. This is the problem, isn't it? And this is perhaps what we're seeing around the world currently in 2025. This interpretation of who is dangerous, allowing people to be dealt with in some way. He then goes on to say that they could use firearms, warning them, and those who do not sort of follow the police's instructions, they will be punished. So here's a really different and sort of edgy Germany the next day. So February of 1933, the country is already different to what it was before Hitler became Chancellor. There's an aggressive tone to this, a threatening tone to this. Now, perhaps you could argue everyone knew what was coming when they voted for the Nazi Party, but lots of people voted for the Nazi Party out of desperation, remember. All right, so this is one thing that could go some way to suggesting that the current events, or the events that are happening over the next year or so to make Hitler Fuhrer, were not necessarily an accident. Okay, so this is where it gets interesting. And even for those of you who just take things as they are, let's take a look at this. Hitler defended making 50,000 of his SA brown shirts an auxiliary police force, basically supporting the police. So the brown shirts, the thugs, the SA are going to support the police. They're going to act as a police force Very similar probably to what's happening in America at the moment with ICE, if you've been watching or aware of that. It's like a sort of extra law enforcement put in place by the government. So the brown shirts are going to respond to all claims or anything that goes wrong, essentially being sent to areas and events to, of course, interrupt, shall we say, like they've always done. So people are a bit worried that this is rule in Germany by thugs, but I guess at this point, are you going to go against the threat of in the streets, just like maybe in America today? Just maybe. And I'm not saying that is what's happening, but there are certainly some similarities, aren't there? So the Chancellor then gets up and he states that the measures were necessary to defend against, and then again quoting, the likelihood of a communist revolution, which he claimed was about to, quote, and this is important, burst into flames. So Hitler is essentially saying the reason we've got the brown shirts in is because we expect any second a communist revolution in the streets. Now, again, similarities politically, if we look at what's happening in our world today, there are governments who are sending in their police forces or law enforcement into states or cities or countries to put down riots, rebellions, perhaps riots and rebellions that aren't actually happening. But they're saying that we have no choice, we've got to protect the citizens of such and such. So again, similarities here, aren't there? Now, this is what's interesting here is they are saying there is an imminent communist revolution. Now, there hasn't been one since 1921 in the Spartacus uprising. So why Hitler thinks there's going to be one now? There wasn't a communist revolution after all previous chancellors in the last couple of years. There wasn't a communist revolution during the Great Depression. So it's just interesting. But the words here are going to burst into flames. Now that has been said. That will be all over the newspapers. You're planting seeds here, aren't you? Okay, so let's see cynically what that might mean. The suggestion there is something is going to explode, burst into flames, happen imminently, and the Nazi Party are ready to protect the citizens of Germany. Okay? Now, funnily enough, on the 27th of February, just weeks later, the Reichstag building, the Parliament building, bursts into flames. Now, I'm just going to leave that there and suggest to you, if we are thinking about inferences that we can make, and part of our exam, question 1 is about making inferences. Come on. Okay, they said it, and this is what's happened. So, of course, this is attacking the symbol of democracy, the Parliament building. The voice of the people has been attacked. This is awful. One eyewitness said that the dome was lit up as though by a searchlight. Every now and again, a burst of flame and a swirl of smoke blurred the outline of the Reichstag building. Now, this is where it gets really, really interesting. A Dutch communist called Marinus van der Lubbe was arrested, a young lad, after being discovered in the burning Reichstag, in the building. How he got in, who knows? Maybe there's a plot, a conspiracy. He had earlier been heard saying in a local pub, apparently, allegedly, that he was going to set fire to the Reichstag later that day. Now, what's key here is, you've already seen it, and hopefully you start to twig, that Marinus van der Lubbe was a Dutch communist. So here is that communist terrorist attack that the Nazis just suggested was going to happen. Okay, so van der Lubbe is arrested and is executed for this crime. Hitler has now said that Germany is under attack. The communists have tried to destroy the very fibre of their democracy. And now, of course, Hitler is going to be able to pass some laws in the guise of we are being attacked. We need to protect the people. And this is where democracy just starts to lose its power. All right, we're going to get to a point where Hitler is going to change the constitution, but he can't just do that. He needs to convince the country that there is an imminent danger. Now, the similarities to where constitutions have been changed due to terrorist attacks are 2001 in the 9/11. America, in fact, most countries in the West, perhaps, they changed their constitution to allow the government to perhaps snoop, listen in, basically be more aware of what was going on, spying, if you like, in the understanding that they were trying to protect the citizens, to try and stop evil terrorists getting involved. So you could argue, and as a historian, these are things that we should always be trying to look big picture, because we're not just here to pass exams, of course. But again, we see, don't we, and people have said that the problem with history is we don't learn from history. Perhaps, and again, this is just interesting just to talk about. the similarities here. So van der Lubbe is going to be removed, but the point is the communists have attacked the Reichstag building, and Hitler is going to come out as the great saviour and the great hero. Now, whether or not the fire was started by van der Lubbe or by the Nazis to make it look like the communists, it's almost irrelevant in this story because the people believe that it was a communist attack. Okay, so as a result of that, the communists are not going to be allowed to run in the March election. Now, again, cynical. That's a whole lot less people who can vote for the communists. Maybe some of those will vote for the Nazis, which will increase their numbers more towards this majority. Okay, so now that we've told that story, maybe I've been a bit cynical. Maybe you can see what I'm saying, or maybe you just think, no, it was definitely a communist attack, and Hitler is right to do something about this. So pause the video and write down some of these facts. These are the facts that you'll include in your answer. Just for, obviously, if it's a section B, you're going to need to give a bit of own knowledge to back up some of the quotes you're going to use. But van der Lubbe was arrested and executed. Hitler said the communists attacked Germany. This is what's important. Hitler said the communists had attacked Germany, and they believed him. I think probably a lot of people didn't believe him. A lot of people probably thought it wasn't. But ultimately, when the police force are now being controlled by the Nazis and they're out on the streets and the SA are out on the streets trying to protect our country, no one's really going to shout out, are they? So 4,000 communists were arrested on the night of the fire. Again, to me, that is an incredible piece of work, that you can know exactly where all these communists are. Not just hundreds, but 4,000 communists. This might suggest to me, if I am inferring something or reading between the lines, that this evening was planned all along. There had to be a fire and we had to arrest communists, okay? They need an excuse to do that. So what has happened then under the guise again of being under attack? Hitler has asked Hindenburg to pass emergency powers, all right? Remember, things that we don't need to go through Parliament with, Article 48. So emergency powers under the fact that Germany is currently under attack. So there was this emergency decree, which for the short term, whilst the country's being attacked, is going to give Hitler these emergency powers. He's going to be able to ban communist newspapers. Number two, he's going to be able to control the police, and so therefore, cynically, they could turn a blind eye to SA violence. So the brown shirts maybe killing communists, or whatever they're doing, they are going to control the police. Okay. Number three, all freedom of speech is suspended for everybody, but we know what that really means, don't we? And number four, and this is important, the death penalty for any disturbances of the peace. Now, again, who decides what a disturbance of the peace is? If it's a Nazi police officer or SA, they just decided that you were disturbing the peace because they didn't like the look of you, then you are dead. Okay, so this is extreme, and this is just a matter of weeks since him becoming Chancellor. Do you think at this point this is the ultimate opportunist, or do you think perhaps this was a little bit more planned? So we need the fire to pass the emergency decree, but he's still not the Fuhrer. He's still not the dictator. He may well have created this atmosphere of fear, but he could still technically be removed by the president. So just have a little minute just to think to yourself, what next? What would you do next? Now you've got this bit of the story set up. Now this has happened. You've either set it up yourself or you've had this event and you're going to react to it and become a opportunist. What next? Just pause the video, have a little think to yourself, and then when you're ready, unpause and we'll see if you are correct. But there's an election coming up in March, conveniently just a few days later. Right, so here we go. Hitler has now come out. He's attacked the communists. Now that he's made everyone hate the communists and fear the communists, thanks to his fire, this quote says. Now, that's just me being a bit silly. Doesn't matter. It's irrelevant in your course who set the fire for our purposes. The purposes were that it is going to lead to this election where the communists couldn't vote. The joke there is, I mean, their fire. Everyone is afraid of them. I'll get the old git to call another election. Now, Hitler didn't say those things. I have written that as a quote, just to give you a little bit of, I don't know, relativity maybe. So the election is called after the attack. He's come out of this fire looking really strong. He's told the people they've been too soft for too long. You know, the sort of typical things we're hearing around the world today. Surely this will get them their majority in the Reichstag. So the 5th of March, about a week later, here are the election results. The Nazis get 288 seats. Okay, so they've got more than the 230 they got in the last election. Possibly some of those are communists. Possibly some of those are people who just believe that the Nazis are going to take control and save their country and protect their country from all these threats. But you'll see, with a bit of quick maths, that's still not a majority. Still not the majority. They haven't got 51% or more of the votes if you add up everybody else. All right. So using these emergency powers, as we know, the communists were banned. Then they've got this support. Now, in order to get the full support over the 51%, Hitler does something very interesting is he makes a deal. Now, in the terms of proportional representation in the Weimar Republic, there is no surprise that the fact that parties make coalitions. And in this case, the Nazis have got 288 seats. They make a deal, a coalition with the Nationalists. So, of course, Nationalists, remember, are another right-wing party. So it'd be like in maybe in England today, you've got UKIP and Reform might join together to get more seats for a right-wing party. Similarly, Labour and the Lib Dems, or the Lib Dems and the Green Party on the left, could join together to get them more votes. That's how politics works. So by this now, Hitler has got a majority. 2/3 of the Reichstag or the government have joined together, meaning that he has a majority, and that is important in the next bit of this story, is he could now change the constitution if the Reichstag or Parliament votes on it. Now they've got more than 51% of the vote because of this election, arguably because of the fire. Maybe that's where things get a little bit more serious, okay? So that's where we're going next in the next bit of our story. He's got enough votes to change the constitution. And next that follows in the 23rd of March. Now, you can see with the dates of all these things, we're talking days and weeks between each one, which again, cynically, could suggest, couldn't it, that it was all planned. These things were in place, ready to go. I don't know even if he was the ultimate opportunist, if he would be able to organise all of these things to be so quick and so smooth. So the Enabling Act on the 23rd of March, the Nazis have the majority of the Reichstag, of the Parliament, thanks to the Nationalist Coalition. Look at the word of it. This is not difficult. Enabling Act. Act being law. They're going to try and pass an act that will give emergency powers to Hitler, the Chancellor. One man. Remember this whole idea of the good old days of one king in charge. This is what they promised them in the elections, didn't they? They promised them stability, one strong leader, democracy had failed, all of those things. But there's surely people aren't in the Parliament going to vote for this Enabling Act. They're going to basically vote to give up democracy. They are going to hand power to one man, creating a dictatorship. Now, the people in the Parliament have all been elected, surely, but we'll see. Now, it's obvious, isn't it, that this is what's going to happen. Again, thinking about what's happening around the world today, in real life for us, in America, you've got a lot of American politicians who are voting for things that might appear anti-democratic or might appear to be taking people's rights away, but yet they're voting for it for their president. Okay, now again, please don't misconstrue what we're saying here. I'm not saying that Trump is a Nazi or America or any of those things. What I'm saying to you is politically there are some similarities in how some countries are run. We're not saying it's a dictatorship, okay? We're just looking at what's happened throughout history, and I could call on many countries to compare how politics works sometimes to perhaps get powers or laws passed, okay? Elizabeth I did it. She was a bit, shall we say, clever or devious in getting the religious settlement passed. We're just saying this is what happens. So the Enabling Act is essentially going to give emergency powers to Hitler. He can rule by decree, so he can do whatever he wants, pass any law he wants without Parliament. There's no need for the Reichstag, and all other political parties are going to be banned. That means there's going to be one party in the country, and looking like Russia again, perhaps, and North Korea, one party. We know what that looks like today, and this is what it looked like, and we know the story anyway, don't we? This is where it's going. But just maybe, 4, 5, 6 weeks since being elected, he's managed to get this Enabling Act passed. Really super interesting, fascinating how it happened. It would have been quite fascinating to be around at the time, I think. So just pause the video and read this to yourself. I don't want to go into every single word of this. This is just a bit of backstory, a bit of context perhaps, to give you an understanding of what's happened. And also start putting yourself towards the idea of making a judgment. Which of these steps do you think was the most important in leading to him becoming the Fuhrer or the dictator? When you've read it and you're happy with it, maybe make down a couple of little notes in your book or wherever you're writing this about what you think is important about this. All of it's important, but maybe take away a few points, bullet points to summarize it, and then we'll move on. Okay. So this here is an eyewitness account of what happened the day of the Enabling Act. And again, I'm not going to read every single word of it to you, but essentially the gist of it is, if you pause the video and read, it's interesting because we can see these things happening today on our televisions, on the internet, on social media, in various countries around the world. We can see how these political meetings happen. In this case, on the day they tried to pass the Enabling Act, the gist of what this is saying is the SA surrounded the temporary Parliament building, because obviously the Reichstag has just gone up in flames. So no one could leave. There was a definite element of fear and intimidation around the room. And there was a threat. Basically, if people didn't vote for this Enabling Act, then they were enemies of the state. So, of course, people then, maybe through fear, genuine fear, they voted for the Enabling Act, okay? Possibly lots of them regretted it. Possibly lots of them didn't want to, but they've got families and children. Who knows what these Nazis are capable of? We've seen what the SA are capable of. So they voted for this. So read the story of what happened on the day. Try and get a sort of mental picture of the event, and then we'll have a little look at the result of the thing, okay? There are lots of evidence in there, but this is an important just point to stop and just think about how this happened politically, because remember, all of this is legal. All of it is legal. It's within the Constitution. Okay, so this is what the Enabling Act is going to do. Now, you, in your book or wherever you're making these notes, as each box appears in the next minute or two, you're just going to write the summary of each article. Okay, so it's very wordy, very political, as these things tend to be, laws and acts. But they're going to vote on the following. That Article 1 of the Enabling Act is going to assume power over the legislation and budget. That basically means Hitler is going to be in control of any law. He can make any law he wants and get rid of any law that he wants, and of course control the budget. That's what they're going to vote for. Article 2, in summary, is they're going to allow the constitutional amendments without any other authority. Now, changing the constitution is massive, isn't it? Huge. Like, the point of a constitution is that's how the country is ran. So now, for a little while, because of the attack, Hitler is going to be able to change the constitution, and that could be anything. You can make anything up you want that might help the Nazis, of course. Women voting, nope. I don't know, drag queens, that could be changed, couldn't it? People with freedom, all of the things that perhaps the Nazis don't like, they could get rid of. Foreign people, immigrants, all sorts of things. If they can change the constitution, they can do whatever they want. We're slowly starting to become a dictatorship, aren't we? Article 3, any laws that are issued by the Chancellor, they take place the second he says it. Now, that's dangerous because people might not have actually heard about the new law and could therefore be found guilty of committing a crime or breaking the law even before they knew about it. And that's convenient if you are going to target certain people, which maybe we'll talk about next lesson in the Night of the Long Knives. Again, ultimate opportunist, reacting to everything that happened, or was this perhaps planned? It all just seems really well done, doesn't it? Okay, Article 4 says that he assumes control over any treaties, particularly with foreign states. Now, the first thing you should be thinking of there, what is he now able to get rid of? Okay, hopefully you're thinking to yourself the Treaty of Versailles, of course. So now he can, because of the Enabling Act, get rid of the Treaty of Versailles, start paying the reparations, start rebuilding an army and an air force, and all of those things that the treaty said you couldn't do. Marvellous, okay? Article 5, and this is the important bit, the caveat of all of it. This Enabling Act will only last for 4 years. That's what Hitler's going to say to Parliament. Vote for it now. It'll give me all this power for 4 years. And after that, we go back to democracy. This is all just because we are under attack, remember. That's the key bit. Now, as we know, 4 years came, 4 years went, and Hitler remained the dictator until the end of World War II. But this is what it generally is. Try and make sure that you have a good understanding of the Enabling Act, particularly the small summaries, just so you can talk about that in your own knowledge, be it Section B, source question, or the big 20 marker, or even for a 12 marker. You might get a lovely 12 marker would be explain why Hitler was able to become Fuhrer, or why Hitler was able to consolidate or secure his power. 1933 to 34, then of course the Enabling Act is going to be a paragraph, isn't it? So you're going to have to be able to include these facts and what the Enabling Act did. If it was a 12 marker, we could obviously have the fire as paragraph 1, the Enabling Act, the Night of the Long Knives, that you'll do next lesson. So this is a great topic for our exam, really. Not only is it fascinating, not only can you understand it and relate to it, but it's a really straightforward examination type topic. There's clearly answers And again, you can't be wrong because there's loads. You pick three, all right? Or in the case of section B, there will be two interpretations to this, which we'll talk about obviously more. And if you are watching this as revision, as you're approaching your exams, then keep that in mind. Practice this as a topic. Make up the question yourself. How far do you agree with interpretation 2 about how Hitler became Fuhrer? One interpretation says fire, one says enabling act. You know, you can do it. Just make sure that you know exactly what's happening in that exam. So enabling act, going to the people, and of course it was passed. Now, yeah, they got a majority by making a coalition with the nationalists, but look at the result. 444 votes to 94. They didn't even need the nationalists in the end. Why do you reckon 444, such a huge majority, voted for this enabling act, essentially getting rid of democracy, basically giving Hitler full power? Possibly the fact that the SA are around the room, fear, threat, warning. If you don't vote for it, you're going to become an enemy of the state. I don't know, maybe you'd vote for them. Who knows? All we know that in the 23rd of March 1933, they voted for this enabling act, which has now given Hitler complete power. So to summarise, the enabling act in the last 4 years, Hitler can pass any law he wants without the Reichstag voting on it. These new laws can change the constitution, and they will be proposed by Hitler. And when he says it, it's official. And then, of course, we've got the SS, the black shirts, the terror squads, and the SA are going to be able to intimidate people into voting for this thing. So now we've passed it. Now we start thinking about, particularly if you are revising from this, and if you're watching this for the first time, you may not have heard of the Gestapo, but you probably have. You can now start seeing why over the next coming years, people can do what they want to Jews, burst into Jewish people's houses. The Gestapo can spy on people and kidnap people and all those things because they come under the Enabling Act, don't they? They are allowed to do it by law because of this Enabling Act. So that's really important. 444 votes to 94. So let's think about this question before we finish off this lesson. What effect did the Enabling Act have on the Reichstag? Essentially, it's given Hitler dictator powers. He doesn't need to ask the Reichstag, the parliament anymore. He can do whatever he wants for these next 4 years. Like we said earlier in this lesson, that lasts a lot longer than 4 years, doesn't it? Okay. So as a task, if you were in class, you'd have done this. But as you're not and you're watching this to catch up or just for revision, we've got some events here and we've got a graph. Okay, you can draw this however you want, but just take all of these events over the years and put them up. Going up, obviously, the higher up you put them in the top half of the graph, that gives Hitler power. The lower down you believe they would mean Hitler wasn't really that powerful no matter what. Now, it goes from 1923 to 1933, so you should expect these events to go up as you go along, but try and keep them in chronological order if you can, roughly. Pause the video while you do that. Obviously, in a minute, you'll see what it should look like or what I believe it could look like. Now, the point here is, it's your opinion, as is most of history. So we can see, for example, you might put the beer hall putsch 1923. That was a disaster for Hitler, wasn't it? He went to prison. It was embarrassing. I wouldn't say the beer hall putsch particularly made Hitler powerful. So I might put the beer hall putsch 1923 low down, certainly in the bottom half of the graph. Hopefully that makes sense, okay? When you're ready and you've done that, unpause the video, move on, and we'll have a look at mine. So this is where I have put these events on this graph, and hopefully you can agree. I mean, we might discuss or disagree on a few of them, but essentially we can see that stepping up to the Enabling Act, he's got the ultimate power there, hasn't he? He's not more powerful until he's got the Enabling Act, okay? So with that said, let's have a little think about this interpretation. Pause the video yourself, have a little read of it by Shira. What is the view? What is this historian saying? Do you agree with what this historian is saying? Essentially that the Enabling Act is the reason for all of this. And if you don't agree, say why not. But try to get in the habit of picking out some quotes of what this historian says, arguing it and supporting it. Why is he right? Why might you not be right? Why do you agree? Why do you not disagree? Sorry, why do you disagree? Just good practice to have for all of your exam questions as well. So I'm just going to pause the video, let you do this, or you pause the video rather, answer this question, what is the view, and do you agree, and if so, why, and if not, why, and then we'll finish off this lesson. This will be the last big task of this lesson. So world domination starts here. The first thing he now does, now that the Enabling Act has been passed, is he bans all trade unions. Remember, trade unions are there to work for the people, give people rights, I don't know, privileges, I don't know, at work. They're there for the workers, okay? So he's got rid of the thing that workers could fight for or go on strike and things like that. These have gone, so the workers now have no rights. They have to do what Hitler says, otherwise they might face some trouble. So that's the first thing he does. He bans all political parties. Now, we knew that. That's what they were voting for in the Enabling Act. So all parties are now gone, of course, except the NSDAP, the Nazi party. So there's no one else to vote for, which is essentially the end of democracy. And all local government now is going to be replaced by Nazi governors. All right, so probably similar to those Gauleiters, I'd imagine, that we talked about in the rebrand. They're going to basically be controlling all parts of Germany, even the local councils. If this was in our country, you know that recently Reform have just won a lot of councils. But generally speaking, around the country, every council is controlled by a different political party. Now, in this Germany, after the Enabling Act, all councils, all local governments are going to be controlled by the Nazis, okay? So there are no parties anyway. So basically, there's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. We are now in Nazi Germany, okay? So at this point, we could have a little pause, thinking about everything we've talked about so far. On that beginning bit where we had the steps to Dictator, to Fuhrer, maybe start giving this a score now, whatever you want, maybe out of 5. 5 being the most crucially important event, 1 not. Everything we've talked about in this lesson, what was more important? Would the Enabling Act have happened without the fire? Would the election result have mattered without the fire? Would the Enabling Act have been passed without the election result? And so forth. Get your head around that in this lesson, and we'll just do the same again for the next lesson, which is going to be the Night of the Long Knives, and then everything else that gets Hitler to power by 1934. If you are watching this as a revision video, then you already know the rest of the story, but just get yourself thinking about which of these things are more important. But really what it counts for is towards a section B. We could get any 2 of these reasons why Hitler became the Fuhrer. You have to basically say how they're all correct, because of course they're all correct. All right, so before we finish for today, let's consider this. Despite everything in this lesson, is he really secure yet? Is he really the Fuhrer? So he's passed the Enabling Act. He can pass whatever law he wants. He can change the constitution. But is there still one thing that they cannot do whilst somebody's alive? Thinking about the constitution? The president. Now, we've saw that with the many chancellors in 1929, 30, 31, 32. Chaos, wasn't it? Chancellor after chancellor after chancellor. We know that Hindenburg hates Hitler. Hindenburg could stop Hitler. Now, he could, of course, change the constitution, but quite new into his party, into power. He's got all this power, but he's not a dictator yet, so that might not go down so well. I don't know, but it doesn't seem that Hitler would mind either way. But just to finish off this lesson, just keep this in mind. Is he the dictator yet, or is what we're going to do next lesson a little bit more important? Okay, so as always, thank you so much for watching this video. Hopefully it's been helpful, not just for your exams, but maybe just getting you to think a little bit and be aware of what's happening politically around the world, so we can perhaps see signs of history happening again. Really interesting story. Hopefully you agree. If you do have any questions, ask us, ask your teacher, or drop us some comments. And we will see you for the next video. Once again, though, cheers, thank you very much, and goodbye.